My name is Thomas Earl Whitfield. I am 64 years old, and I spent 31 years building a commercial real estate consulting firm from a single rented desk in a shared office on East Trade Street in Charlotte, North Carolina. I retired in 2019 with a clean balance sheet, a paid-off home in Myers Park, and what I believed was the most important asset a man could accumulate over a lifetime, the trust of his family. I want you to sit with me for a moment before I tell you this story, because it is not a short one. 9 years. That is how long this went on. That is how long I wrote a check, later a wire transfer, for $3,200 every single month, believing I was doing the right thing, believing I was the kind of father and grandfather that my own father never got the chance to be for me, believing, most of all, that the people sitting at my Sunday dinner table were who they presented themselves to be. I was wrong about one of them, and the receipts I found in a black trash bag behind my son's house on a Tuesday morning in March changed everything I thought I knew about my own blood. But before I take you there, tell me, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city in the comments and tell me what time it is where you are. And if you believe that the truth always finds a way to the surface, leave a like and subscribe, because this story is proof that it does, every single time. Let me start at the beginning. My son, Marcus Deshaun Whitfield, was born in 1987. He was the kind of child that made strangers stop and say something. Sharp eyes, quick smile, the kind of boy who memorized the stats of every Charlotte Hornets player before he was 9 years old. His mother, my late wife Gloria, used to say Marcus had a salesman's soul. He could make you feel like whatever he was telling you was the most important thing you'd ever heard. Gloria passed in 2013 from pancreatic cancer. 18 months from diagnosis to the day I buried her at Gethsemane Cemetery on Bell Street, she was 57 years old. The grief of losing her is something I will carry to my own grave, but I tell you this because it matters to the story. After Gloria passed, Marcus became the center of my world. He was all I had left of her. In 2015, Marcus brought home Denise Renee Carter. She was 31 years old, a licensed occupational therapist working at Novant Health, quiet and deliberate in the way she spoke. The kind of woman who remembered what you told her 3 months ago and asked about it the next time she saw you. Gloria would have loved her. I know that without question. They married in October of 2015 at Mount Carmel Baptist Church on Bees Ford Road. I paid for the wedding, $84,000, including the reception at the Westin Charlotte. I did it gladly. Gloria would have wanted that. I stood at that altar and watched my son take the hand of a good woman, and I thought, this is right. This is what a legacy feels like. In January of 2016, Marcus came to me with a request. We were sitting in my study. He had a legal pad in his lap and a pen he kept clicking. He told me that he and Denise were trying to buy a house, a 4-bedroom in Huntersville, which was growing fast and was a good neighborhood for raising children. He said they had saved a down payment, but the monthly mortgage, combined with their student loans and Denise's car note, was going to be tight. He said he didn't want Denise to feel the pressure of finances so early in their marriage. He asked if I could help. $3,200 a month, sent directly to Denise's personal account, so she could feel secure, so she wouldn't have to worry. He said Denise was proud and would never ask me herself, but that she was the one carrying most of the household stress because Marcus was in the early stages of launching a property management startup and his income was inconsistent. He showed me a spreadsheet, line items, mortgage, utilities, groceries, car insurance, her student loan minimum. It all added up to $3,200 with a small buffer. He had done the math. It looked reasonable. It looked responsible. I said yes. I set up a monthly wire from my Truist bank account, branch on Camel Road, to an account number Marcus gave me. He said it was Denise's personal checking. He said she would be so relieved. He said, "Dad, you're saving our marriage before it even gets hard." I should have felt the wrong in that sentence. A saved marriage in its first year. But I was a man who had just lost his wife, who was desperate to keep his family intact, who wanted more than anything to believe his son was the man he'd raised him to be. So I wired the money. January 2016, $3,200. And then I wired it again in February, and March, and April. For 9 years, Thomas Earl Whitfield wired $3,200 every single month, believing it landed in Denise's hands. That is $345,600. I want you to hold that number. The years passed the way they do when you are retired and living alone in a house that was built for more people than currently occupy it. I have my routines. Early morning walks through Freedom Park. Breakfast at Amelie's on North Davidson. Monthly lunches with my fraternity brothers from Alpha Phi Alpha. We'd pledged together at Johnson C. Smith University back in 1980, and those men were the architecture of my adult life. Marcus and Denise had 2 children. My granddaughters, Jordan, born in 2017, and Amara, born in 2019. When those girls came into the world, something in me that had gone quiet after Gloria passed began to breathe again. I was at every birthday, every school play, every Sunday dinner at their house in Huntersville, where Denise cooked the kind of meals that reminded me of my mother's kitchen in Canopolis. Collard greens with smoked turkey, cornbread from scratch, peach cobbler that made grown men close their eyes. I want you to understand something. During those 9 years, I saw Denise regularly. I watched her manage that household, raise those girls, work full shifts at Novant, sit in the front pew at Greater Walters Ames Zion every Sunday. I watched her stretch. I noticed she drove the same Honda Accord for 6 years. I noticed the house needed a new roof for 2 years before it got one. I noticed she always deflected when I asked how things were going financially. She would smile and say, "We manage, Daddy Thomas. We manage." I thought that was pride. I thought the money I was sending was a quiet cushion, something she appreciated but didn't need to discuss at the dinner table. I thought Marcus had built something of a system, my support in the background, their life moving forward on top of it. What I did not think, what did not enter my mind as a real possibility for 9 consecutive years, was that Denise had never seen a single dollar. Now let me tell you about Marcus's business. His property management startup. He called it Whitfield Property Solutions, which I note he used my name without ever formally asking. Launched in 2016. By 2018, he had a website, an LLC registered in North Carolina, and a leased office space on West Moorhead Street. He drove a 2019 BMW 5 Series. He wore Zegna suits to church. He took his friends, a rotating cast of men I'd never met and never fully trusted, on golf weekends to Pinehurst. I assumed the business was doing well. When I asked, Marcus spoke in the language of entrepreneurs. Pipeline, equity play, scaling, managed friction. I had spent 30 years in commercial real estate, and I knew what a legitimate operation looked like. But I also knew that startups had their own rhythms, and that success didn't always announce itself early. So I asked, but I didn't press. He was my son. I gave him room. What I did not know, and would not know for 9 years, was that Whitfield Property Solutions had never been profitable. Not once. It had cycled through investors, lost 2 commercial contracts due to mismanagement, and by 2021 was operating almost entirely on a combination of credit lines and the $3,200 that arrived in an account every month from his father. Not Denise's account, Marcus's account, The account number he gave me in January 2016 was never Denise's. It was a secondary personal account he had opened 2 weeks before that conversation in my study. A Wells Fargo account. In his name only. I did not discover this on my own. I discovered it by accident, the way most devastating truths arrive, not with a dramatic confrontation, but quietly, in the most ordinary of moments. It was a Tuesday, the second week of March, 2025. Marcus had called me the night before to say he was having some work done on the back deck and asked if I could stop by the house to let the contractors in while he was at a meeting. Denise was at the hospital for a double shift. The girls were at school. He said the contractors would arrive at 8:30 and he'd be back by 10. I arrived at 7:55. I let myself in with the spare key I'd had since 2017. I made coffee in Denise's kitchen. I knew where everything was, and I waited. The contractors were late, which didn't surprise me. I took my coffee to the back porch, and that was when I noticed the recycling bins had been knocked over by the wind, spilling paper into the yard. I am a tidy man. My mother was a tidy woman, and she raised me accordingly. I began picking up the papers and placing them back in the bin. Most of it was ordinary household waste. Utility bills, grocery receipts, a school fundraiser notice from Jordan's class. And then I saw a folded envelope. Inside it, a printed bank statement. Wells Fargo. The account holder name at the top read, Marcus D. Whitfield. I almost folded it back. Almost. But a line in the transaction history caught my eye before I could look away. A recurring deposit listed 12 times on that 12-month statement, each for the same amount. $3,200.0. Wire transfer T.E. Whitfield. My name. My money. His account. I stood in that backyard in the cold March air, and I did not move for what felt like a very long time. The coffee went cold in my hand. The contractors arrived, and I let them in, and I smiled, and I spoke, and I gave them instructions about the deck. And not one of those men had any idea that the floor had just dropped out from under the man standing in front of them. What does it feel like to discover that your son has been deceiving you for 9 years? I will tell you. It does not feel like anger, not at first. It feels like the air has been replaced with something heavier. It feels like every Sunday dinner, every birthday, every moment you looked at him with pride is replaying at a different speed. And you are watching yourself from a distance, and you are asking, how did I miss this? I took photographs of that statement with my phone, all 12 pages. Then I placed it back in the envelope, folded it, and put it back in the recycling bin exactly where I found it. I finished my coffee. I waited for the contractors to complete their assessment. I locked the house when they left. I drove home to Myers Park. I called no one. I sat in the chair by the window where Gloria used to read, and I thought about what I was going to do. Now here is what I want to ask you right now. In this moment, if you had discovered what I discovered, what would your first instinct have been? Would you have called your son immediately? Would you have called a lawyer? Would you have gone straight to your daughter-in-law? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Because my instinct, the one I had to fight hardest against, was to call Marcus right then and demand an answer. But I did not. And that decision changed everything about how this story ends. I am a man who has been in business for 3 decades. I understand that the first piece of information you find is rarely the whole picture. I also understand that a man confronted with evidence he is not prepared for will do one of 2 things: confess or destroy. And I did not yet have enough to make confession the only option. So I did what I had always done when a deal was in trouble. I gathered information before I made a move. The first call I made was to my accountant, Ronald Bridges, who had managed my personal finances since 1998. I told him I needed a full audit of every outgoing wire transfer I had made since. January 2016 marked for Marcus, or any account number he could trace to Marcus Whitfield. I told him I needed the destination account information for every single one. I told him I needed this within 72 hours. Ronald called me back in 48. Every wire, 108 transfers over 9 years, had gone to the same Wells Fargo account. Account number ending in 4471, registered to Marcus Deshaun Whitfield. Not once, in 9 years, had a single dollar touched Denise. Ronald was quiet on the phone for a moment. Then he said, "Thomas, do you want me to pull the business records for Whitfield Property Solutions as well?" I said yes. What came back 3 days later was a picture I had not fully allowed myself to imagine. The LLC had filed operating losses every single year since incorporation. In 2022, Marcus had taken out a business line of credit for $85,000 against the company's projected receivables that existed largely on paper. The BMW was leased in the company's name. The Pinehurst golf weekends were expensed as client entertainment. The Zegna suits were purchased on a company card. And the company's primary reliable income, the one steady deposit that appeared every single month without fail, was the $3,200 wire from his father. I was not his father. I was his operating budget. I want to pause here and tell you something about Denise. While I was assembling this picture, I began to reframe everything I had observed over 9 years. The Honda Accord she drove for 6 years, the roof that needed replacing, the way she stretched, not because of pride, but because she genuinely did not have what I thought I was giving her. She had been building that household on her occupational therapist's salary alone. She had been doing it without complaint, without asking me for anything, without knowing that 9 years of financial support from her father-in-law had been flowing past her like a river she couldn't see. The anger I had been containing began to take a different shape. It was no longer just about the money. It was about what Denise had been quietly carrying. It was about my granddaughters growing up in a household where their mother stretched every dollar while their father spent mine on golf and German automobiles. It was about the fact that this woman had called me Daddy Thomas for 9 years, and I had never truly been her Daddy Thomas at all. Marcus had made sure of that. I made a decision. Before I confronted Marcus, I was going to speak to Denise. I called her on a Thursday evening when I knew Marcus would be at his weekly investor dinner, which I now understood to be a networking event he attended more for appearances than for actual business. I asked if I could come by and see the girls. She said, of course, come for dinner. I sat at that kitchen table while Jordan showed me her science project, and Amara insisted on reading me 2 chapters of her library book. And I watched Denise move through that kitchen with the grace of a woman who had learned to make beauty out of limited materials. And I made myself wait until the girls were in bed. Then I sat across from her at that kitchen table, and I placed my phone between us with one of the bank statements on the screen. I said, "Denise, I need to ask you something, and I need you to know before I ask that you are not in any trouble, and I am not here to cause you pain." She looked at the screen. She looked at me. I said, "Have you ever received money from me?" "Monthly, since January 2016. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. I counted. Then Denise said, very quietly, "Daddy Thomas, what is this?" I told her everything. The account. The amount. The 9 years. The 108 transfers. She did not cry immediately. She sat very still. Her hands were flat on the table. She stared at the phone screen for a long time, and I watched her face move through something. I recognized the specific expression of a person reorganizing their entire understanding of their own life. Then she said, "I always wondered how he could afford the things he bought while we were always tight. He told me his business was growing, but the money took time to come in. He said we had to be patient." She said, I worked extra shifts at Novin for 6 years because I thought we needed the money. She said, I didn't fix the roof for 2 years because I thought we couldn't afford it. And then, finally, the tears came. Not loud tears, the quiet kind. The kind that come from a place too deep for noise. I reached across that table and I took both of her hands and I said, I am so sorry. I failed you. I should have verified. I should have asked. I let my love for my son blind me to what he was doing to you. She shook her head. She said, you didn't do this, Daddy Thomas. He did. I told her I was going to fix it. I told her she needed to speak to an attorney, specifically a family law attorney, before Marcus knew anything. I gave her the name of Beverly Hutchinson at Hutchinson and Reeves on South Tryon Street, one of the best family law attorneys in Charlotte, who I had already called the day before. I told Denise that what happened next was her decision. I would support whatever she chose. But I wanted her to walk into it informed, protected, and knowing the full truth. She squeezed my hands. She nodded. I drove home that night, and I sat again in Gloria's chair, and I talked to my wife, the way I sometimes do when the world becomes too much to carry alone. I said, I need to do this right. Not for me, for her. For those girls. I could almost hear Gloria say, then do it right, Thomas. You know how, the week after I spoke with Denise, I made 3 calls. The first was to Beverly Hutchinson, confirming that Denise had made her appointment and that the initial consultation had gone forward. Beverly couldn't share details, attorney-client privilege, but she confirmed the meeting had taken place. That was enough. The second call was to my own attorney, Gerald Patterson at Patterson and Moore on North College Street, who had handled my business affairs since 1994. I laid out everything. The transfers, the account, the business records Ronald had pulled, the conversation with Denise. Gerald listened without interrupting, which is one of the reasons I had trusted him for 30 years. When I finished, Gerald said, Thomas, on the civil side, you have a clear case for fraudulent misrepresentation. He obtained funds from you under false pretenses, representing that the account belonged to Denise when it did not. The documentation is strong. The question is what outcome you want. I told him I did not want to destroy my son. I wanted the truth acknowledged. I wanted Denise protected. I wanted those girls to have stability. And I wanted Marcus to understand, fully and completely, what he had done. Gerald said he understood. He said we needed one more piece before we moved. He recommended we obtain a formal forensic accounting review of Whitford Property Solutions, a firm called Meridian Financial Forensics, based in Charlotte, that Gerald had worked with on 3 previous cases. He said, if the business records showed what we suspected, that the company had been operating as a listing as if the business records showed what we suspected, that the company had been operating as a sustained vehicle for personal enrichment funded substantially by my transfers, we would have a picture that was not just morally devastating but legally documented. I authorized the engagement. It took 11 business days. The Meridian report was 47 pages. I am going to tell you the parts that mattered. Over 9 years, Whitfield Property Solutions had received approximately $1.2 million in total capital from investors, credit lines, and transfers. Of that, $345,600 was traceable to my wire transfers, all of which had been recorded in the company's internal ledger as owner capital contributions. The remaining funds had come from 4 private investors who had each been told the company was performing at a level it never reached, and from 2 bank lines of credit. Marcus had drawn a personal salary from the company of $110,000 per year for the last 4 years, despite the company generating less than $60,000 annually in actual revenue. The balance had come from capital, my capital, among others. The BMW, the suits, the golf weekends, a vacation to Ciebas and Lucas in 2023, a $12,000 watch purchased at Mayer's Jewelers on South Park Mall. All of it was in the Meridian report, line by line, with dates and amounts. I read that report twice. Then I called Gerald and told him we were ready. Now I want to tell you about the morning I called Marcus. It was a Monday. Early April. The dogwoods in Myers Park were in full bloom, the way they always are in April in Charlotte. And I remember looking out my kitchen window at the one in my front yard that Gloria and I had planted when Marcus was 3 years old. I called his cell phone at 8:15 in the morning. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" I said, "Marcus, I'd like you to come to the house this evening, 6 o'clock. I need to talk to you about something." He said, "Everything okay?" I said, "I just need to sit with my son for a while. Can you come?" He said, "Of course. I'll be there. I want to know something about that exchange." My son heard nothing in my voice that alarmed him. He had no reason to believe that anything had changed, because I had made sure over the 5 weeks since I found that bank statement that nothing in my behavior toward him had shifted. I had attended Sunday dinner 3 times. I had watched Jordan's soccer game. I had texted him on his birthday. I had sent the March wire as usual. That last point is one I have been asked about, why I sent the March wire after knowing what I knew. The answer is strategic, and I will not pretend otherwise. If I had stopped the wire before confronting him, Marcus would have sensed the disruption and had time to prepare, move assets, or approach Denise with a version of the story before she had legal counsel. The March wire was the last one, and it gave me 5 more weeks to build a foundation he could not dismantle in an afternoon. Gerald had advised me well. Patience defeats arrogance. It always does. Marcus arrived at 6:02. He was wearing a quarter-zip pullover and dark jeans, and he looked comfortable, the way a man looks when he believes he is walking into his father's house for a routine visit. I had set the dining room table, 2 glasses of water, a folder in front of each seat. His folder was thicker than mine. He sat down and looked at the folder, and then looked at me. Something shifted in his eyes, just a flicker. But I had known that face for 37 years, and I saw it. I said, "I'm going to ask you to open that folder and look at what's inside before either of us says anything." He opened it. The first page was a printout of the account statement I had photographed in his backyard in March. The second page was the wire transfer summary Ronald had compiled, 108 transfers, 9 years. $345,600. The third page was the summary cover sheet from the Meridian Forensic Report. He looked at the pages. He looked up at me. I said, "I'm not going to ask you if this is real, Marcus, because I already know it's real. I'm not going to ask you why, because I think I understand why. What I am going to ask you is this. Is there anything in that folder that is inaccurate? Anything at all?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Dad." I said, "Is there anything inaccurate?" He said, "No." That one word, "No." It sat in that dining room like a stone. I said, "I want you to understand what I know. I know the account was never Denise's. I know the money went into Whitfield Property Solutions as owner contributions. I know the company's financial condition. I know about the BMW and the watch in CIBO. I know that Denise worked extra shifts at Novin for 6 years because she believed money was tight. I know that the roof on your house went without repair for 2 years because your wife thought you couldn't afford it." He looked like a man who had just understood for the first time that the ground beneath him was not solid. I said, "And I want you to know that Denise has spoken to an attorney, and that I have spoken to mine." He said, "Dad, please." "Let me explain," I said. "Marcus, I love you. I will always love you. You are my son, and that will never change. But I need you to hear me when I tell you that love is not the same as tolerance. I tolerated this unknowingly for 9 years. That is over. I told him what was going to happen. Gerald had drafted a civil demand letter, which Marcus would receive formally within the week, outlining the fraudulent misrepresentation claim and the amount in question. In parallel, Denise's attorney had already filed for legal separation. Marcus was going to be required to make a full accounting of the company's finances in the context of the divorce proceedings. I told him that whether this ended in a courtroom or in a negotiated resolution was entirely up to him. I told him that if he cooperated fully with Denise's attorney, with the financial disclosure process, with the equitable settlement for her and the girls, I would not pursue the civil claim. Not because he deserved that grace, but because my granddaughters did not deserve to watch their grandfather take their father to court. I told him that the condition of that grace was simple: full transparency, full cooperation, and a settlement that left Denise and those girls with genuine stability. He sat across that table from me, and for the first time in 37 years, I watched my son cry the way a boy cries. Not a man, not composed, not controlled, but broken open. I did not reach across the table. I let him sit with it. After a while, he said, "I don't know when it became this." I said, "I do. It became this when you decided that appearance mattered more than integrity. When you decided that your comfort was worth more than your wife's security. When you decided that I was a resource instead of a father." I said, "But that is not who I raised you to be. And it is not too late to become the man I know is in there. But that man has to start with the truth." He nodded. He wiped his face. He said, "What do I do first?" I said, "You call Beverly Hutchinson's office tomorrow morning, and you tell them you want to negotiate. You tell them you are prepared to make full financial disclosure. And then you do exactly that. I want to stop here and tell you what happened over the following 4 months, because the details matter." Marcus cooperated. Not perfectly, not without moments of resistance and backsliding, but cooperated. The forensic accounting was submitted in full to the divorce proceedings. The marital assets, such as they were, once the company's true financial picture was clear, were inventoried honestly. The settlement Denise received included the Huntersville house outright, primary physical custody of Jordan and Amara, child support calculated against Marcus's actual income rather than the inflated lifestyle the company had been funding, and a lump sum payment that and I'm telling you this without hesitation, funded personally from my own accounts at Truist Bank. $220,000 paid directly to Denise Renee Carter Whitfield, not as repayment, not as guilt, as what it was, 9 years of support that should have been hers from the beginning. Denise cried when Gerald called her with the wire confirmation. She called me that evening, and she couldn't speak for almost a full minute. Then she said, "Daddy Thomas, you didn't have to do this." I said, "Denise, I sent that money for 9 years to take care of you. I'm just making sure it finally did." Marcus sold Whitfield Property Solutions in September of 2025. He liquidated the remaining assets, settled the business credit lines, and returned his investor capital at a significant personal loss. He moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Noda. He's paying his child support on time. He sees the girls every other weekend. I see him once a month for lunch. It is not easy. Some things that are broken do not return to their original shape. But a father's love is not contingent on his son being perfect. It is contingent on his son being honest, and Marcus is learning, late, at great cost, what honesty requires. Jordan and Amara spent Christmas at my house in Myers Park. We decorated the tree the way Gloria and I used to do it: white lights, family ornaments, the handmade star at the top that Marcus made in the 2nd grade. The girls slept in the guest room and woke up at 6 in the morning and came and found me in the kitchen, already making biscuits. Amara climbed up onto the counter stool and looked at me with her grandmother's eyes and said, "Grandpa, why do you always get up so early?" I said, "Because the morning is quiet and I like to think." She said, "What do you think about?" I said, "About the people I love and how to take care of them." She nodded like that made perfect sense. Then she asked if she could help stir the biscuit batter. I said yes. I want to leave you with this. There is a version of this story where I confront my son the morning I find that bank statement, where I call him screaming from his own backyard, where pride and anger drive the next move instead of patience and strategy. In that version, Marcus has time to prepare. Denise has no legal protection, and the outcome serves no one. The version you just heard happened because I waited, because I gathered, because I made sure that when the truth came to light, it came with documentation, with legal structure, and with a path forward for the people who needed protection most. My father used to say, "A man in a hurry is a man who hasn't finished thinking." I am 64 years old, and I have never once regretted slowing down to finish my thinking. $345,600, 9 years, 108 wire transfers. And the most important thing I can tell you is this: the money can be replaced. Time cannot. Dignity cannot. The look on Denise's face when she finally understood that someone had seen what she had been carrying, that cannot be bought back or rewired. Do not let the people who love you quietly carry weight that was always meant to be shared. And do not let the people who take from you do it in the name of love. Truth has a long memory. And patience, real patience, the kind built on 64 years of watching the world and learning its rhythms, is the most powerful instrument a man can hold. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this story moved you, if it made you think about someone in your own life who might be carrying something quietly, share this with them. Leave your like, subscribe to this channel, and I will see you in the next story. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other.